Well, today was a big day. It was announced today that Anthony Fauci has contracted COVID-19, or more correctly, he tested positive and he's mildly symptomatic. He's, of course, double vaccinated, double boosted, and has unfortunately come down with COVID-19. First thing I want to say is, of course, I wish him, like anyone who gets COVID-19, a speedy recovery. And I also think it's an important moment to point out that it's not a question of how can I avoid a COVID-19 breakthrough? It is inevitable. Everyone is going to get a COVID-19 breakthrough. And I think the moment we really accept that, policy changes dramatically. Trying to slow spread no longer makes sense when most hospitals are not flooded with people suffering from COVID ARDS. They may have a lot of people with COVID, but they're not there from COVID. And that's an important distinction. Trying to control spread after a widespread vaccination campaign doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And at this point, it's clear the vaccine cannot control spread because it cannot stop a symptomatic infection. It still appears to have a benefit on severe disease and hospitalization, but it cannot stop any symptomatic disease. And as a result, it was only a matter of time before Anthony Fauci would get COVID-19. Now, I think Anthony Fauci's role in the pandemic will someday be left in the eyes of historians. Of course, he was notorious for a major flip-flop. He went on 60 Minutes, said that, you shouldn't wear a mask, it'll touch your face, and then a few weeks later he said, you ought to. And his reason for why he said that thing the first time was that he was lying to you. It was a noble lie. I was lying to you so you wouldn't take all the surgical masks and N95s from healthcare workers. But when he came back and told you the recommendation, he didn't recommend a surgical mask or an N95. He recommended a cloth mask. And since a cloth mask was always something that could be fashioned out of your t-shirt or a sock or some fabric around your house or could be purchased, it was never going to threaten the surgical mask or N95 mask supply since the recommendation was a cloth mask. So that explanation doesn't make a lot of sense. And we talked about this in an article in Slate, Noble Lies. Go check it out, myself and Logan Powell. But after that, he moved into the world of schools, and he had many, many comments, and people have pulled together some of his interviewed clips as to what he said the risk was for reopening school, what he thought about Ron DeSantis reopening school. I think anyone who history will find was on the wrong side of the school closure issue, who supported school closures and prolonged school closure, is not going to do well in history. And then, of course, a number of other things happened since then. And I think I'll leave it for historians to decide. But I can understand why people are a little bit upset. He also championed lockdowns. I mean, lockdown was his idea, which wasn't in the pandemic playbook to begin with. But anyway, I'll leave that for historians to decide. He's unfortunately come down with COVID-19. I wish him a speedy recovery. Moving to the next topic, the kids' vaccine. The kids' vaccine, it looks like the votes are in. And the votes are, we're going to do it. So we'll see what happens. We'll see when they authorize this. It looks like the Moderna and the Pfizer both have a positive vote. I just want to point out a few things. I saw somebody tweeting that, we know vaccines protect against severe disease. We know that's true for older people, but we don't really know that's true for young kids. Of course, when you run a randomized control trial, you really only have the power and ability to comment definitively on the primary endpoint. The primary endpoint of these antibodies, I said it, the primary endpoint of these studies was antibodies. It was non-inferior geometric mean antibodies. It wasn't what we would want, which was, I think, severe disease and hospitalization. Now, why wasn't it that? Well, the sample size of the study would have to be a lot bigger to measure that endpoint reliably. How much bigger? I speculated it would be several 100,000, but somebody wrote back to me and said it's actually going to be closer to the millions. And I think even if it was in the millions, that's an acceptable sample size. Because, of course, the moment you authorize this, millions of people are going to choose to do this. How many million? I don't know. But when it's 5 to 11, it's plateaued, below 50%, maybe below 40%, maybe about 1 in 3 5 to 11-year-olds has gotten any doses of vaccine. This age group, I think, is going to be a little bit lower. It's going to be a little bit lower just because more of them have already had COVID-19, and we're further along. And as time goes on, people are less and less concerned. And since more of them had COVID-19, the potential to benefit a child who had COVID-19 is a little bit up in the air. Because what you really want is a randomized trial with enough power that there's enough people in that who've had COVID and recovered from COVID, which is probably upwards of 75 minimum. That's a CDC estimate from many weeks ago, but maybe even upwards of 80% or 90%. And you need to have enough of those people to show that in that cohort who have positive seroprevalence at baseline, when they get reinfected with COVID, or when they get the vaccine, they are less likely to have severe disease subsequently from any potential reinfection. That's what you really want to see in a really well-done randomized controlled trial. Now, what would it cost these companies to run those studies? It'll cost them a fair bit of money, but did you know they've already made lots of money? $100 billion is what Pfizer is poised to make this year from many things, but a big chunk of that is from their COVID portfolio. I'm a believer that when companies are making that kind of money, tens of billions of dollars from Paxlovid and vaccination, that regulators have an obligation to make them do trials that measure endpoints people care about, not endpoints that are surrogates, that are mere stand-ins, particularly when those surrogates are unvalidated, particularly when the thing the surrogate is for is really the old Wuhan ancestral strain. It's not for the current strain. So the surrogate and the validity of the surrogate to predict the response for the current strain is even more strained and stretched. So, what else did I see today? I think these are the two big news. Fauci got COVID-19 because everyone's going to get COVID-19. So people who want to wear an N95 in perpetuity, that doesn't make sense because even this man who's very precautious didn't go to the gridiron dinner, he's going to get it. So they're going to get it too. It's only a matter of time. So the question is, what precautions can you live with forever? And I think for most people, the answer is that many of these precautions are untenable. My kid's vaccine, I saw there are many heartbreaking stories. Somebody said that their 3-year-old has never been to the grocery store with the family, never been to a birthday party. And somebody said that's why the vaccine is necessary. It's going to make that parent feel more comfortable taking the kid to a grocery store. And my only thought was that if a healthy 3-year-old child has never been to the grocery store, the failure isn't a failure to vaccinate the child. The failure is that nobody communicated to that child's parent that the risk of that activity and the risk of even getting COVID-19 is not high enough to ban them from going to grocery stores. That would be an over-response. And to live your life with such fear against COVID-19 is irrational. It was a distortion of the real risk. There's a risk, of course. It's not zero, but it's lower at that age than it is, say, a 70-year-old who's even been triple vaccinated. It's lower to the 3-year-old. So if the triple vaccinated 70-year-old would go to the grocery store, and if you'd be comfortable with that, you should be comfortable with a healthy 3-year-old going to the grocery store. I think it's a distortion of risk. I also think that approval of medical products is not contingent on how anxious people are. And if people are anxious and they've changed their behavior in a way that we think is suboptimal, we don't approve medical products just to sate the anxiety. We have to approve medical products if they're safe and effective, if they have a net clinical benefit. I think if people are perfectly honest, the sample size of this randomized control trials at these age groups leaves a bit of doubt. The CDC's observational studies that they have presented in the meeting leave a bit of doubt. Those observational studies are very, very confounded. The parents who rushed out and got their 5-year-old or 6-year-old vaccinated are very different than the parents who didn't rush out and do that. And as long as those differences exist, you can't tell the effect of the vaccine from the types of people who are rushing out. And we all know the types of people rushing out. They're often well-educated. They're often in liberal enclaves. They're often people who are otherwise very precautious. And that comparison to the people who are not rushing to get it is really fundamentally fraught and can't be done. Can't even be done with a very granular EMR. This is the classic confounding by indication. It really can't be overcome. Proof of that is that the FDA has an ongoing project. I believe it's called Project Replicate, where they take the target trial framework and they try to recapitulate and emulate randomized control trials and reach the same result. And it's been press released that this project, Project Replicate or Emulate, has failed. We will find the result when it's finally published. The last thing I saw is, of course, Steph Barral came out just like Adam Sifu did, and he said, when I don't have to wear a mask in the hospital setting, I'm not going to wear the mask. And apparently that's consistent with what the nation of Switzerland has already done. And of course, the mob has piled on him. They piled on Adam Sifu. They piled on people who've said this. I think a couple thoughts. One, I remember when being a liberal meant you didn't shame someone for stating their preference, for stating what they would personally like or not like, that I'd like not to wear a mask at work, and when the requirement is lifted, I'm not going to do it. You wouldn't shame someone for saying they'd like to breathe the fresh air of the hospital. You wouldn't shame them for that. But it's strange that now the culture has shifted so dramatically that it's the extreme fringe COVIDian, often, which is allied with the left, that is shaming them for doing that. Two, I think that part of that tactic is to get people to be quiet about their preferences. We can't have 95% of doctors say, oh, me too, me too, me too, me too, which is what I expect the true public sentiment is. But if they have that, it will be much harder for them to maintain that position in the world of social media. And so social media then becomes more and more a reflection of the particular personalities and quirks and idiosyncrasies of those people who are vocal on Twitter and their self-reinforcing behaviors, and not really a broader public dialogue or public consensus. And the gap between real life, where people appear to be living normally in most places in America, and Twitter life is broader and broader, and that's bad. That's sort of a preference falsification kind of situation. It's very bad. It means that we're not able to be ourselves on social media. So I really lament it, and I've come to the defense of these two gentlemen who I think are superb doctors and even better clinicians, and even better sort of gut sense of a risk, and proportionate and balanced risk. And so I was troubled by some of that backlash. So, busy day. I think, it will be very difficult to use observational data to conclude about the ultimate efficacy of kids' vaccination. End of story. But I think someday historians will look back and say, when Salk did his polio trials, he was easily able to randomize hundreds of thousands of kids. When you did your COVID-19 vaccine trials decades later, with more resources and with better knowledge of evidence-based medicine, you only randomized a few thousand kids. You didn't measure severe disease. I think historians will look back on this as a failure of evidence generation. And the same for Paxlovid. That's the other bit in the news. Paxlovid, EPIC SR, the randomized control trial which also included vaccinated people, has come back with a negative study result. It's not significant. Now, somebody said to me, well, the point estimate is a 50% reduction, but the confidence interval is so wide, I don't have confidence that that's a significant result. But more importantly, the vast majority of Paxlovid use has been in the vaccinated. EPIC-HR did not apply to that. That's the unvaccinated study that people are hanging their hat on. It simply doesn't apply to the vaccinated population. The vaccinated study is statistically insignificant. It's not a significant study. Now, the UK is running Panoramic, which is a randomized control trial, which will be the final verdict of this, I believe. But the order of operations is wrong. You generate evidence before you spend billions of dollars on a product, not after you spend billions of dollars on a product. If it is the case that UK Panoramic is stone cold negative, and there is some chance that that will be the case, if it is stone cold negative, or if the effect size is very, very trivial, such that the product is not cost effective, it will be a devastating blow to public health, to the government purchase of drugs in crisis, to government regulation around drugs in crisis. It will be a devastating blow. I must reflect. I see the, consumer price index soaring, and I see inflation rising, and I see talk of recession. I see now the interest rates are going up. And I think it's clear that by all of the sorts of things that typically predict election cycles, it's not looking good. I think in addition to those things, one of the mistakes that was made here is the COVID-19 policy. I don't know who is actually advising the president. I hope that, I won't say that. I'll say this. I don't know who is advising the president, but all I know is that the advice that they were getting in this administration is terrible advice. And if there's anyone in the administration who's watching this video, let me tell you why. You blew a lot of political capital on vaccine mandates. Many people, myself included, thought that was a mistake. From the outset, I wrote many op-eds saying that would be a mistake. It turned out to be a double mistake. One, I think if you're really fair and you look at the trajectory of vaccination before and after your mandate and look at the difference in trajectory, it really didn't make much of a difference, just a few percentage points. Now, I know you like to think that everything that happened after the mandate is due to the mandate, but of course there was a natural trend. It was going to go up anyway. So be fair. Do the proper analysis. The next point I'd say is that the double backfire was that you had variant that was, almost entirely escaping it in terms of symptomatic disease. When you have a variant escape that much in terms of symptomatic disease, your efforts did nothing to curb transmission. The die was cast and breakthrough was inevitable, and all that political capital you blew on that is going to do nothing there. And I think that was a divisive move, and people didn't like it. The next major set of errors that the administration made was you didn't heed the advice of Gruber and Krauss on the booster issue. You tried a one-size-fits-all policy when you could have so easily just targeted 65 and up, people with comorbidities, something like that, and people could have gotten it if they wanted. But by pushing a one-size-fits-all booster, drug approval, even though the evidence, I think, still is lacking at younger ages, you created a situation where many actors felt like they wanted to institute a local institutional mandate, colleges in particular, which is a particular space that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that creates a further backlash because people know that ultimately, I think the administration is responsible for that, because had they not granted the EUA under very low regulatory standards, had they not put pressure on Gruber and Krauss such that they resigned so that they weren't there to oppose it, then you couldn't have had widespread college mandates. And so I think that's another blow. The persistence with masking and N95 masking after it became clear that breakthrough is inevitable is also a misstep from the administration. The goals of slowing spread are so that you slow it until you do the thing that lowers your risk. That thing is vaccination. Once you've done that, once you've offered that to people and you've let all the people who want to do it, then you no longer have sort of a reason to slow the spread, except for imminent hospital collapse. But you've not been there from COVID-19. You've not been there in a long time. Few places in this country for a few weeks, for some time, but for most of this country, never. And for recent weeks, never. I mean, no, it's not an issue. So you really don't have a justification for that. And I think that was a mistake. You pushed too hard on that. You didn't give people clear advice, which is, I think what I've always said, after vaccination, or boosting if you're older or more vulnerable, get back to normal life. That should have been your message. It was a much better message. And everything you did around kids. The kids' vaccine trial, you gave them too low a regulatory bar. The kids masking and sort of creating the constant panic, the testing of kids over and over again creates so much disruption to people's lives. So all these COVID-19 issues are really, you've chosen poorly. Your advisors have chosen poorly. They are unfortunately COVIDian advisors. They're people who are just such zealots on that issue, they've lost a broader public health training. And I think that you need to get rid of them if you were to have any chance. They keep digging the hole deeper. The midterm will be terrible, but even after the midterm, if you keep these advisors, it's just going to get worse for you. You're going to have no shot in 2 more years. You need to get rid of them. You need to have some sensible advisors, okay? Anyway, I really urge you to rethink the policies you're doing. Lowering the regulatory standards for these approvals is not the path forward. It's not going to actually do much. It's going to leave a lot of uncertainty. It leaves you very vulnerable. If that UK panoramic study is negative, do you know what people are going to say about you spending $5 billion on Paxlovid and giving it out to vaccinated people? Like Skittles, people are going to be really furious about that. It's going to be a Tamiflu debacle all over again. Okay. Those are my thoughts. Fauci has COVID. Vaccines are coming. People are shaming people who are just saying, I don't want to wear a mask when I don't have to, which is ridiculous. Paxlovid, Epic SR, not significant result. We'll wait about the UK panoramic. Busy day in COVID-19 policy. Busy day. This channel, you get a range clinical trial appraisal. You get some COVID videos and maybe some videos that are pertinent to healthcare news of the day. You get it from the point of view of a physician and epidemiologist. So, if you like what you hear, like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Recommend this video to a friend. Recommend the channel to a friend. And until next time.